Hello and welcome back once again to the Inquisitor podcast with me, Marcus Cauchi. Today, I have somebody who I consider to be one of, if not the best recruiters on the planet, Joe Mullings. Joe, welcome.
Marcus, thanks again. Great to be here.
Excellent. No build up there and no difficult expectations to exceed. Joe runs the Mullings Group. He is routinely credited by his team for creating an amazing sales culture, and his consultants routinely invoice 3 to 5 times more than their nearest competitors. Joe, would you mind giving the audience a quick 60-second rundown on your background before we get stuck into the meat and gristle of our conversation today?
Sure, I'd be happy to. And again, thanks for the generous introduction. Recruiter started out as an engineer. So I grew up in New York, went to school, engineering degree, spent a couple of years there. As I said, went to the dark side to recruiting after about 3.5, 4 years. Specifically went into the medtech industry. I always knew that people would want to live longer, healthier, and technology would always seek a higher ground. And so therefore that. And I also knew the barrier to entry with my competition there would be so high because it's a really difficult technology platform to deal with. I've been fortunate enough to have been surrounded by amazing people over the last 30 years. And our firm has been responsible for more than 7,000 placements and well over 130 to $140 million in fees, American, over the years. And we're the only search firm in the world that has its own media company and entire studio, as you can see behind me, committed to us, about a 5,000 square foot space and a full production company.
Excellent. I will put that clip on video, but this does only go out on audio. So let me ask you this, because it seems that there is something of a sea change happening. We've recently launched this community, Salesforce for Good, with a view to tackling some of the toughest and gnarliest problems there are in sales as a profession. And over the last 40, 50 years, sales has been subverted away from putting the customer at the heart, being a service profession, to being this lapdog of investors and greedy speculators. And as a result, the customer is kind of an afterthought of this long chain of greed. And net result of that is that sales has moved away from the essence of serving the customer to help them be successful and achieve their outcome. Why do you think that's been allowed to happen?
Yeah, it's a great question, Marcus. And so you start with every behavior, what are the rewards? Because rewards drive behaviors, regardless of whatever it is, whether you're training a dog or training a sales force or getting trained by your significant other. Rewards will drive those behaviors. And historically, most organizations have a sales force that is, and it's funny, there's a bifurcation that occurs, and that usually is led by executive decisions, is there's either fantastic sales forces or miserably poor sales forces. And I mean that by retention. I don't mean that by outcomes, because you can drive a successful sales force based on economics, but when you longitudinally take them downrange, they historically will fall apart. And then there's great sales organizations that you never even hear of in the public domain. And those are generally played to the long game. And the rewards set up for the sales organization are sort of redeemed accordingly. So I think it comes down to how are you rewarding your sales organization? And then that typically gets tied to how does the C-level suite get rewarded?
Okay. So again, you've jumped ahead of where I was headed, but I'm good with that. So I fundamentally believe that no amount of happy thoughts and great ideas and fabulous effort on behalf of the sales community will make the damnedest bit of difference until we tackle executive culture and executive reward. And we also in the same breath have to also tackle the drivers and motivators of greedy speculators dressed up as investors. So let's speak to that. Why is it that investors have been allowed to subvert what has up until now been a profession that, or up until about 50 years ago, has been a profession that was only existed to serve the customers' outcomes and needs, and now has been turned into this transactional factory of mental illness and churn?
Well, I think you can see it in the public market. So it's at the end of the day, again, we'll go back to rewards drive behaviors. And when you are rewarded or not rewarded on quarterly results, which is what drive publicly traded companies, that in itself, and a lot of times will drive behaviors. And again, the person I look at that I don't want to say I emulate, but I try and drive towards his mindset to playing the long game and not listening to Wall Street or investors is Mr. Elon Musk. So Elon has gone on, an evidence-based where he will play the long game all the time and will not get caught up in advertising, will not be driven, at least outwardly it seems, by Wall Street and stock price. And so, again, small sampling here, but there's an individual who's become the wealthiest person or one of them on the planet, following a North Star and hiring people and setting such a high bar and not worrying about sales or quarter-to-quarter outcomes, but more so concerned with what is the long range and a 5 or 10-year version. So I think there's a lot of executives that their contracts drive them, their behaviors based on economics and outcomes. And after a certain point in time, you can only spend so much money. And so it would really be interesting to have a redistribution of economics at the executive level, redistributed further down the food chain in an organization where everybody shares in the outcomes, not on a 3 to 5% increase annually. And I would love to see shareholders and executive leadership share their success back towards an organization, which in itself will drive it to a longer standing, healthier behavior and will answer both the economic and social must-delivers in society.
Well, Henry Ford said that a company that's built exclusively to make profit is a bad business. And, businesses, I fundamentally believe, should be set up to serve their customers, serve their employees, serve their community, and profit is a byproduct of that. And increasingly what I see is, and you only have to look at the top 100 SaaS companies. The top 100 SaaS companies have a median profit of 0%. Now, that to me sounds very, very close to a bubble. You have the early adopters or the early investors, the speculators, and the risk takers, and then it builds momentum, and then hysteria takes over, and then there's a crash. And I see so many companies in the technology space in particular, but we're seeing the same thing in property. We're seeing it behaves much like a virus does. It's this madness of the crowd. And I think there are so many people who have got sucked into the idea that you can sustain unprofitable, rapid growth forever. So what do you say to them? Because clearly your business hasn't been built on those kind of rocky, sandy foundations.
It's interesting to dissect the wins, right? So you talk about the SaaS model. I think the SaaS model may end up having some of the same challenges that the dot-com bust had, and also the housing market, at least in the United States in 2008 had. And the SaaS model is interesting, but I also believe that it's over-indexed towards the flavor of the month, because I've sat in so many board meetings and have watched this digital transition occur in the health tech, medtech industry that's gone fully digital, and they continue to point towards the subscription model. But then at the same time, they'll say, well, look at Salesforce or look at some of these other subscription models. You're taking an outlier. But it would be interesting to longitudinally dissect how many of these subscription models on the SaaS side of things were able to endure that over or under subscription, and how did they end up in the end game. And so again, it comes back to stock price and comes back to publicly traded markets. It's very, very difficult to run an organization that is cash poor in a high-tech market, over-leveraged, to have an ROI on a quarter-to-quarter basis that doesn't ask it to either go into over-leveraged situation or count on an acquisition in order to exit. And that's the issue with SaaS models. SaaS models are all counting on an acquisition, which is why they drive their subscription base. And once they get that subscription base, the acquisition occurs, and then you run into the integration issue. And so it would be interesting to unwind all that. But again, that comes back to behaviors of the executive team at all costs. Get them on the subscription, tell them whatever they want to hear, and then that ends up being a poor sales cycle.
But again, the mistake people make in these bubbles is they look at the outliers and they say, right, oh, we're going to be one of those.
That's right.
You see companies trying to emulate Splunk. 17 years ago, you could do what Splunk did, but you're trying to take it to your startup today ain't going to happen. Trying to emulate Salesforce today when you're a 3-man business out of some back bedroom isn't going to cut it. And so very often what we see are people fixated on trying to copy something that doesn't actually bear any relevance to where they are in their business. So a quick question about the mindset of founders, because so often what I see in these fast growth, hyper growth type scale up companies is the founders are fixated on their exit. And the idea is that they're going to IPO, but most of them just get flipped to another VC. And the VC community is in effect a little oligarchy or quango, and they just keep swapping their trades whenever their fund comes to an end and they've got to cough up to the investors at the payout. So what most of them find is that they end up losing their shit. So again, what advice would you give to founders in terms of picking your investor?
So I want to make sure we close out with this thought on, you refer to Salesforce, and it's, so if you think about these references, Salesforce, Airbnb, Uber, right? They are all first movers. They all grab that massive market share in the beginning. So therefore, the market dynamics changed. So it's okay for you for at least this conversation to say, okay, I'm going to use that model or parts of that model, but they may only hold true if you're a first mover in a category. And you've got to make sure that while you're looking at some of the characteristics of some of these organizations that were in a SaaS or a subscription model, that your category is, one, the dynamics are similar, meaning first and foremost, your market share grab is certainly relevant if you're the first in, because you can gain that critical mass. And then as Salesforce did, and as Airbnb did, and as Uber did, you're able to expand, land and expand in that market. But if you're trying to break into a market that there's already a presence and a stronghold on, and you're thinking you're going to come in on a subscription model against that large Rock of Gibraltar, the market dynamics are terribly different. And to only compare it in a past, or let's call it a retrospective view, when you're not giving enough credence to there's already a market player in it, I think is somewhat kamikaze suicidal. So I just wanted to, before we moved on, that first mover market share, market grab applies when you're going to go after that sort of subscription model as a first in. So that's that one there. In regards to your question, oh gosh, money's interesting right now from an investor perspective. So I've got 4 categories. I've got the private equity market, and of course they're only buying revenue. you've got the venture capital market. They're willing to take on risk early in the game, and will get paid for that risk handsomely on a shorter term, or punished appropriately. Then you've got the really interesting market right now, Marcus, the SPAC market, right? Special Purpose Acquisition Company. The SPAC market right now, I think, is going to turn certain categories on its head, because what you're able to do is you're able to walk into an investment on the low end, probably 200 million, on the high end, over $1 billion, and you're able to take that cash, unadulterated cash, and go out and buy something. And you can accelerate it to IPO. You're also able to point that cash at a property that has a lot more of a liberal approach to being brought to market, de-SPACed in a public sense. And you're able to either have it as an operator or as a financial instrument. And that's going to spin more of the private equity on its head. And then you've got the public market. So you've got a company that can go through the IPO, which is very expensive, time consuming, and more importantly, so reliant on the sort of social and sort of global markets and what's going on in the world. So we've watched the markets crash up and down, and then all of a sudden resurrect themselves 3 days later. And if you're setting yourself up for an IPO, you are really throwing a lot of your upside or downside to the wind in a geopolitical world, where the SPAC, and we just had 2 interesting people on my show yesterday who explained the SPAC market, you are able to go ahead and lock up investment money, lock up a high quality pipe, and then also lock down the valuation of your company as you bring it into an IPO market. So as you're looking at investors, I think we've looked at PE, VC, and now the SPAC market, and your listeners should be digging into that SPAC market as well. And of course, you've got your IPO. So as you look at this, you've got to look at who you're getting into bed with and what their intentions are, what their track records are, and what vehicle is going to bring you, because that vehicle will drive that investor's behaviors that you have to swallow whether you like it or not.
Well, I think there's something else that one should look at as well as track record, which is intent. Why are you investing in a company? Are you investing in a company because you want to flip it and make some cash, because that drives one type of behavior? Or are you investing in it because you genuinely want that company to succeed and you're supporting it? And I've heard investors being described as smart money and dumb money and bad money. And often smart money is bad money dressed up as smart money. The problem is that so often investors spin a great story. VC in particular has spun this fabulous story of incredible wealth, and founders have been sucked into this gold rush kind of mentality. And the net result of that is that they end up losing their shirt. They give away an enormous amount of control. And whilst they are still a private company, there is no logical reason why they need to work on quarterly reporting cycles that drive awful sales and management behavior, where they try and pressure salespeople to get customers to buy before they are ready. And they go after growth at any cost. And so they start offering 20, 30, 40, 80% discount. And if the customer's not ready to buy, when they are ready to buy, they expect that 80% discount. All they're doing is giving away margin, but also they're pillaging the pipeline for the future, instead of focusing on the here and now and saying, well, we're a private company. There is no reason for us to put ourselves under all this pressure and then create this massive burnout of middle management and junior and young salespeople, which is just absolutely rife at the moment. So what are your thoughts on that?
You cover a lot of really important subjects in that question. So, a few things: who you're in partnership with, and what is their motivation, and then what is your motivation, right? So one of the worst things to do is to bring in an investor, because it's very rare that your goals are aligned. Certainly during the honeymoon period, like any honeymoon period, whether it's a relationship in your personal life or a relationship in your business life. Your goals are aligned in the beginning, and usually that's when everything is perfect. And what I want to do is find out, what is your disposition when things are less than perfect? And so that requires an interview of other investments that you have. So if you're looking for an investor, the number one thing I would want is, tell me about the people who the investment went bad, and tell me about the investment that you're in today, and tell me about the investment that exited successfully. So at least you have some reference points there. So that's number one. Number two is, return on investment has everything to do with timelines. I've been involved as an investor over the years where the timeline was judged in the second inning, and it was judged both positive and negative. And I'm talking about American baseball, but let's go to UK football, or let's talk about the right kind of football around the world, soccer. Don't tell me what the score is 30 minutes into the match. Tell me what the score is, assuming that there's no extended time, 90 minutes into the match. That's the only score I really care about. Certainly, the score during the match will inform what I do through the match, but don't judge me. So ROI is everything at whatever the end of the game is, or whatever that timeline is, and that will drive behaviors. As far as sales is concerned, it's important to unwind adoption and utilization. There's two different dynamics there. You can get me to adopt your product, which may be based on price, but also may be based on features of the product. But ongoing utilization is what defines customer satisfaction and customer spend over the lifetime value of my service or my product. So there are two dynamics there that need to be tracked as you drive and adopt and build your sales team. Is this person great at initial adoption but terrible at ongoing utilization? Or is my sales process set up to serve one and not the other? Because if you don't drive adoption, utilization doesn't matter. But if you're over-indexed towards adoption, utilization may end up punishing the lifetime value of that company. So that's one. And then finally, you had mentioned that the drive for profit, and then the decimation of my middle management team, and then therefore lower management. The number one thing that I look for when I invest in a company or I build a company, number one, beside intelligence, is retention. Is when you can drive retention in an organization, you can overcome a large number of sort of threats that come across the bow, because I know how that person is going to move in the foxhole with me. That person in the foxhole with me knows what the company stands for. That person in the foxhole knows that their job is secure, their future is promising. Today, it may not look promising, but they know that the company's not going to quit on them regardless of the storm overhead. So as you ask that question, there are many sort of complex components in there that should be explored as we look for an outcome.
Well, I think this then speaks to compensation. The traditional way of, and also whom we recruit. The traditional hunter versus farmer division, I think, is outdated, and it definitely doesn't serve the customer because it focuses on adoption rather than utilization. One of the things that I'm wrestling with at the moment, and I'd love your thoughts on this, is if compensation schemes were weighted more towards the utilization and customer success component, so that our pricing model also look towards customer success. And as a result, executives, management, sales, customer success, account growth teams, operations teams, all get rewarded. A little bit for winning the account, a lot for utilization and optimizing utilization across the organization, then for repeat business, and for expansion business. Those things should be rewarded more, but historically, the sales community has been absolutely obsessed with the golden child of new business, and channels and account growth has been seen as something you hand over to your juniors or to less talented people. And I think that's wrong, because that's where the profit is. That's where the longevity of the relationship with the customer is. And so we're focused on the wrong end of the problem. And you mentioned geopolitics. I look at the Western way of doing business versus the Oriental, and I think we're screwed when it comes to competing with China over the next 30, 40 years, because they have 100-year plans. We work on quarterly reporting cycles. Thoughts?
So
Another big
compensation,
question.
yeah, no, it's a great question, and I love the question because, look, compensation and how you reward people, we have to be careful we're not answering this question from a salesperson perspective, right? So
Yeah.
it depends on the type of organization you're running, first of all, and where is that organization in its life cycle. So I run a number of different organizations. One of the organizations, and this is going to be a general overview, and it's very relevant to what we're talking about. One of my organizations is a pure sales organization. Those people show up every day, not in this order. One is to be playing with a Super Bowl team and a Super Bowl championship team. That they show up. You and I are actually in conversation right now, and I'm thankful for you, about a gentleman in France who's going to join our organization. I think he's fired up because of, justifiably so, based on metrics, it's a Super Bowl team and he's getting drafted. So his motivations right now may be different, but at the end of the day, they're going to be playing. Who are you going to come in and work with every day? How much money can you make? And then what are you doing that has unbelievable tools that will allow me to remain at the top of the tier as I serve my market, right? So teammates, compensation, and the technology that will allow longevity of that. That's one organization. I have another organization that's a media company. And that media company, still at the end of the day, needs to have a compensation plan that drives them forward, because they have thoughts outside of this organization in regards to where they show up every day. But what needs to be tickled on their side of the fence is their creative needs. And again, same human beings, different motivators. And they deserve to, but they're building an organization for me right now. They are putting every bit of their soul creatively into this, their knowledge. But they're not driven exclusively, first and foremost, I think, by economics, but it's a close second, and it should be, because there are cars and mortgages and private schools and dogs to buy dog food for. So you've got to look at the organization, and where is that organization in its life cycle? Because you can't overpay when you're building an organization, because its margins are different as it's growing, and depending on what juice you're putting into that organization. But once it's at a point that you can say, okay, tell you what, my margins now are locked in, and I can either choose to pay my people, the organization, or myself. Once you have that machine down, you have to pay yourself last, you have to pay your people second, and then in a close second, you have to pay the organization. And what I mean by the organization is technologies, tools, and training to keep that going. And you have to be transparent as you do that. So that answers part of it. And then I always think there's 4 components to sales. There's the people who land it, the people who fulfill it, the people who nurture it, and the people who surprise and delight, and we use that term in my firm, who surprise and delight the client. And those 4 components over-index towards the people who land it, and under-index towards fulfillment, nurture, and surprise and delight. And I think that needs to be rebalanced, because the fulfillment, nurture, and surprise and delight are what allow you to have a lifetime value to that customer, which is critical building block. So the hunters, if you will, and I don't like that word, but the people who land the account can end up continuing to land those accounts, but they should not be the Super Bowl MVP.
Well, again, one of the key reasons why I see many customers disappointed is because the person they engage with initially tends to do the drive-by shooting, and they make the sale, and they only ever turn up when there's an opportunity to sell them something else or renew. And I have a belief that we should be partnering with our customers. And if you're trying to create a strong business built on firm foundations, strong fundamentals, selling is a human to human activity. Um, and what's disappointing and depressing is a couple of studies that came out in December 2020. Gartner pointed to their research, which suggests that a third of all B2B buyers want a 100% seller-free buying experience. Salesforce reported that 67% of people surveyed considered sales and salespeople to be morally bankrupt. Now, both of those are damning indictments of our, and I use the term profession loosely. And part of this is that the emphasis on winning the account has taken people away from the fact that customers don't give a damn about you, your company, your quota, whether you get to President's Club and go on the trip to the Bahamas. What they care about is, can you help me solve my problems? Will you help me deliver the outcomes that I need? Will you make my life easier, simpler, more effective? And I'm trying to manage three things: time, money, and risk. Do you contribute to that? Or are you trying to exploit me for your selfish self-interest? And that's where I think we've gone massively wrong. We took a turning somewhere 40, 50 years ago, and we've deviated from that service component. And we've got to get back to putting the customer at the heart of everything we do. We've got to deliver buyer safety. They have to trust us. We have to be relevant, and we have to be of service. But that's gone completely out the window, particularly with all of this quarterly reporting and the lack of long-term vision.
So interesting. I'm in the middle of this right now with a major acquisition with my youngest son. So let me back up here and put some framing around this. I think which is interesting, there's a very fundamental, elegant solution, but simple solution to this. When I think about a buyer, the last thing a buyer wants in their process is a surprise. So
absolutely.
So the drive-by shooting persona that you shared is an interesting one. And one of the simple ways we unwound that over the years is, in our firm, we've got 5 big rainmakers. And, just because I'm the most vocal, I tend to be the biggest rainmaker because I revolve around the brand. And one of the things we never wanted to do was bait and switch our clients. And so what we early on did is say, listen, there's only so many ticks to the talk and the clock in the day, as we said. And there's only 24 hours. And I don't get enough sleep as it is already. But when you call in and you ask for me, or you ask for Matt, or you ask for Holly, or you ask for Gio, or you ask for Dave, they will appear. When they appear, though, there'll also be a team behind them. And so you won't be surprised that when you buy from Gio or you buy from Joe, that all of a sudden Joe's there for the intake call and poof, he's gone. So you're informed immediately, this is the team that's going to take care of you. And that team, you get a document that says, here's your team. Here's Joe, here's Devin, here's Erica, right? Here's Tori. And this is what their role is going to be in the situation. At any point in time, if you need to reach Joe, here's his mobile number. This is the sobering part of this, Marcus. Nobody ever reaches out to me because I'm the guy they don't want to talk to, right? Because, right? So I think the customer doesn't want a surprise. You talk about buyer safety. I think buyer safety can be translated to, I'm feeling comfortable with the team that's taking care of me and give me the experience I want. So that's number one. Number two is no selling environment. You mentioned that before. I want to feel like I'm the most important person when I pick up that phone. In any sales organization, there are anywhere from 2 calls to 50 calls a day. And what happens is that sales team forgets that that's the only interaction that person has with you. Meanwhile, you have 40 other interactions that day, and you treat them accordingly if you don't have discipline or true care on what you do. So you've got to make sure that you step into each interaction, that is the only moment in time that person's reached out to you, And you need to gather yourself and put the right team together that customer gets the most unbelievable experience. And the fee that they're paying, they're happy to pay it to you. And by the way, they'll show up and pay it again. So that's very important. And then finally, sales price. I'm in the midst of buying a car for my 15-year-old son right now. And my wife came home, and it's very interesting. She looked at Volkswagen, she looked at Subaru, and she looked at Toyota. And there's somebody down here called Earl Stewart. Earl, you can pay me for this commercial. When you walk into the Earl Stewart Toyota, you get one price. There's no let me see my manager. There's no destination. There's no delivery price. There's no handling price. You walk in, you know exactly what you're getting. There's no bait and switch on it.
Yeah.
The car she's buying, if I'm not incorrect, is actually a few dollars more than the bait and switch or the Monte Carlo game she was going to play if she had to go to another organization, because it made her feel comfortable, secure, and trusted on the other side of the equation. So that's a little bit of a long answer to where I think that I don't think the sales process is at fault. I think the actors in the sales process have lost their way.
And absolutely, I agree. I interviewed a pal of mine, Andy Shaw, who's the CEO of a company in the care sector. And actually, I should introduce the two of you because I think you'll hit it off. They recruit care workers, those sorts of folk. And he said that when he's buying, if the salesperson gives him the sense that there are going to be surprises or that there's any doubt, if he wants what they're offering, he'll wait until the end of the buying cycle, and then he will spring the need for a discount because he sees that as his insurance premium. If something goes wrong, he wants not to be out of pocket because he's going to have to find an alternative solution. Or he's going to have to somehow cover himself to make sure that he doesn't end up with egg on his face or a crisis. And I think it's so important that we deliver that sense of reliability and consistency. And that, again, has been lost. I think the failure to be rigorously authentic, the failure to get down and dirty and do difficult work together as our partners with equal business stature, exclusively focused on delivering the outcomes that our customers rent from us. And this is the other really important thing. My pal, Bob Mester, talks about customers renting outcomes. And I talk about this a lot on the podcast, and I want people to really get this through their heads. You are only going to keep that customer as long as the outcomes you are delivering remain relevant to where they are in this moment. And the moment you stop being relevant, they may be happy, they may have had great adoption, great utilization, but they will replace you in the blink of an eye. And this is why we need to spend time consistently with those customers, engaging in difficult conversations, in constructive conflict, in co-developing products and services. Because if you fail to pay attention to how their circumstances are changing, you suddenly become irrelevant. Your thoughts?
Wow, you just hit, we're 43 minutes into this, and you just hit, I think, are the two primary components of success in building an organization and building a sales team. So here we go. I've built many sales organizations over my 40 plus years in business, and most of them successful, a couple of them crashed and burned. First of all, I had a really great run in the mixed martial art world. UFC, 7 fighters in it, coached them, trained them, fought for the championship against Sean Shirk. When you take an athlete who's a mixed martial artist, or you take a salesperson who's amazing, that mixed martial artist at the elite level, I'm not talking about the ham bone level. When you take that elite martial artist at the UFC level, they're either a wrestler, a boxer, a kickboxer, or a jiu-jitsu specialist. they have a primary skill set that got them to that elite level. Now what you try and do is you try and at least augment or supplement that primary skill set. And then, styles make fights. The same thing in a sales organization. You got to take your salesperson, realize what she is great at, and then not try and have her be a nurture person or not try and have her be a follow-up person. But your responsibility in leadership is to make sure that you put a camp around her, that she has nurture or surprise and delight or fulfillment around her if she's the tip of the spear. So that's number one, is that comes down to it's don't hate the player, hate the game. Don't blame that player for their strengths, i.e. weaknesses, the yin and the yang to that athlete at the top. So that's one. And that falls on leadership. But the problem with sales leadership is generally sales leadership is the best salesperson who got promoted to the VP, who typically is a really bad coach, just like Michael Jordan was a bad basketball coach. And some of your best pro sports team coaches were never good players, but they were able to put together teams that peaked at that right time and were able to support each other. So that's number one. That's on the sales side. The other thing right now, Marcus, I think that's way under discussed, is understanding that what we do in the sales cycle or the product hasn't changed, but how we do it, the service has. How are you appearing in front of your customer? And that comes down to tech and training and tools. So I can have one of the best salespeople in the world, but if she is not able to appear frictionless, seamlessly, and without interruption into her customer's life, no matter how good she is not going to be successful. So while we talk about skills on the sales side, and we've talked about management, we've talked about leadership, we haven't spent time in tech. And with all of the tools today, and I'm not talking about applicant tracking systems, I'm not talking about Salesforce.com. I'm talking about how do you appear in front of your customer? What is it, text? Is it in-mail? Is it email? Is it voicemail? Is it in person? And how are you moving their experience forward in a satisfactory or even surprise and delight way that it reduces their sort of burden to getting the outcome they want? Not the outcome that you want, but the outcome that they want in a frictionless fashion that fits into something normal on how they operate every day, whether they're checking with their kids or they're checking with their sig other, or they're just checking in on the sports score in a game. Not enough thought is put around tech. When you put a great team together with a great tech solution, that's when you have an order of magnitude and a dislocation from, I think, the norm.
Well, I'm delighted that you talked about the both technology and the team, because certainly in selling into the enterprise space, I fundamentally believe that we really need to start thinking about selling as a team sport. It's not about the individual producer. And I look at one of my favorite salespeople. I'm speaking to her tomorrow. I can't wait. Caroline Pino. She is breathtaking. She got sick in January of 2020 in her first month at Splunk. At the end of the year, despite only being able to work 2 hours a day, she finished the year at 360% of quota. And she is just a magnificent human being. But as a salesperson, what she is fabulous at is managing all the discretionary effort of all the people around her within the customer, making sure that all the moving parts are happening, and having the right conversations with the right people in the right way at the right time consistently. Again, I think enterprise sales in particular and channel sales require a general. They don't require an infantryman. They require someone who is a planner, who is coordinated, who can see the big picture, and can see all the different moving parts, plans for contingency, Make sure that the right people on your side are having the right conversations with the right people in the right way on their side. And it's this incredible ballet, this choreography. And I worry that so few salespeople are being given exposure to that. And as a result, they just become product monkeys and pill pushers. And it leaves the customer feeling disappointed, underserved, undervalued. And we really need to start thinking really carefully about the education and the apprenticeship of salespeople and that whole career path, so that they get exposure to all of these different skills, and they learn the craft. Because sales, nowadays, you flunk your exams, you think, what the fuck am I going to do? All right, I'll go into sales. Or worse, you end up in recruitment. So let's talk about this whole idea of the sales apprenticeship. And this is a 10 or 20-year journey.
Yeah, I'd be fibbing, but you said the word apprenticeship at the same time I wrote that down. God, from when we're children, our behaviors are driven by what we hear at the kitchen table. From the age of 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and beyond. What our uncles say, what our aunts say, what our parents say, what our best friends say. And it drives our behaviors into till the day we die. Unless you have an awakening moment, because some of those were less than desirable in nature, you were able to overcome then, and you had a transition, which some of us have had. And the same as with sales. Most people don't go into university and spend $120,000 or $150,000 on an education and say, I'm going to go start at the bottom of the building and sell these printers till I get to the top of the building and move on. It's not something that anybody at a cocktail party tells their friends that their children are going to go sell, cell phones for MCI or Sprint or something like that. Yet I think it's probably one of the most powerful, moving careers, if you do it right, in the world, because you learn so much about yourself and you learn so much about people that you're dealing with. So look, right now, I think sales, like a lot of behaviors, Marcus, across the world, is the people who are running organizations right now are not digital natives. So they're making all the decisions, and they have very little awareness and clue about the power of scaling what you're doing, both good and bad, the effect it has. So unfortunately, a lot of these organizations are being run by rear view facing mirror sales behaviors, and now they're using technology to scale those, which then is taking a giant turd on the customer.
Yeah.
And then you have some very thoughtful sales leaders who, they could be in their 30s or they could be in their 60s, but had an awakening and understand what it means to manage that customer experience longitudinally, thinking about it not just for the close, but the ongoing retention and ongoing referral business of that individual. And never really ties to it a dollar sign, but ties to its success for both the salesperson and the individual. So that's really important, to delineate success being money and success being outcome. And then when you run up alongside that and you introduce technology, because technology, again, magnifies whatever you're putting out. Mm-hmm. And I believe that, that's been one of our successes here is I think that our organization has figured out how to best service their clients. And then we've bolted onto that the power of technology, reach, and scale. And it allows us to be about 4 times larger the market norm on billings on a desk. So our intentions are good. We have teams delivering a service, and then we're magnifying it massively using technology. And none of us are, well, I'm not a digital native. I'm 59 years old last week. I certainly am not a digital native. However, having said that, I've been surrounded by digital natives who have convinced me over the last few years and facilitated my learning through that. So you take this old dog who learned new tricks, allowing that pathway of education up to the C-suite. And that, I think, is where a lot of these 60-year-old white men need to empower these 20 and 30-year-olds who understand digital reach and then get together in a room and understand how do they deliver that amazing experience to the customer.
And I agree. My disappointment with the way technology companies have sold sales and marketing enabling technology is that they've been transactional. They haven't really focused on the customer's desired outcome. And what they've done is they've created this technology spaghetti where there is massive overlap in functionality, overspend, bad integration, bad setup, and this over-reliance on irrelevant data. And the net result is that salespeople and marketers are fixated on all the wrong things. They're not focused on how do we prospect for a customer who's going to be a customer in 10 or 15 years' time. They're focused on how am I going to make my quota for this quarter. You've got marketers absolutely inundated with data that they have no idea how to use. Pipelines filled with people who are not ready to buy. They're being put into the sales pipeline, and salespeople are wasting an inordinate amount of their time and interrupting these prospect or non-prospects with irrelevant approaches because they haven't done their research. And we've got to get back to some fundamental basics. You need to do your research. You need to be relevant and timely when you're engaging with your prospects, and you need to deliver value on every touch. And that's what technology can amplify. I work on the board of a company called White Rabbit that allows you to filter your list of contacts and identify which of the 10,000 people, of 200 of them, are going to be open to having a conversation now and are likely to engage. I work with Gap in the Matrix, which is a fabulous piece approach to marketing that looks at the language, the way you go to market, the media. Every single communication is designed to drive a neural reward. And when you combine these technologies, then what you end up with is a sales force that does not waste their own time or anyone else's time on prospecting for people who are not going to be open to engagement, but to focus all of your attention on a narrow front on people who are and will be willing to engage. And if you then filter to make sure the right salespeople are having the right conversations, that turns into a sales and marketing superpower. But most of the technology out there is, put bluntly, an expensive vanity.
Yeah, no, one of the there's this saying out there that if you really want to screw up a sales tool or you want to really screw up a social platform, give it to the marketing people, because they will absolutely saturate it, beat it to death, and create a body of white noise in their demand gen, nurture campaigns, ongoing over-indexing till somebody self-selects out. I've learned that over the last year and a half in a couple of relationships I'm with. And then what happens is the salespeople, all they want to do is chase bumpers like a dog. And they end up not spending enough time with the marketing people. So the marketing people are putting out tools and they're ruining and carpet bombing the market. And then putting what comes out, quote unquote, the bottom of the funnel. Meanwhile, they forget that everything goes into the funnel. So therefore, everything comes out the bottom of the funnel. People have this magical funnel that somehow it filters things out. But what you put in the top of the funnel ultimately comes out the bottom of the funnel. It doesn't filter out. It just, you hallucinate that you think, oh, these are great leads that are coming out of this. So what has to happen is your top salespeople need to sit in meetings or get-togethers or whatever we're going to call them with your marketing intention people and have them understand that, no, stop doing 80% of the things you're doing in marketing because you're carpet bombing my market and you're starting to have people become numb to our messaging. You're overselling and over-informing. And so it's a very critical dance right now that we get sales and marketing move into a commercial environment and work together to understand, what are you really trying to do? I don't need 500 leads on Monday morning. I don't, because I'm going to treat them like they're 500 leads. However, if you give me 14 leads based upon a strategy that we worked on together as a salesperson and a marketing person, and I believe those 14 leads, and based on the outcomes of those 14 leads, that some meaningful percentage of them lead to a next step in the process, I will believe you. And your marketing team will learn, and your sales team will actually operate on it, rather than take those 500 leads and put them in the corner because they just spent 2 months working on those and there was no return on those activities.
Well, again, we're coming to the top of the hour, which I'm heartbroken about because I've loved this conversation. But wrapping up, I think one of the big problems that I see is the lack of engagement from marketing with the actual customer. They're not spending enough time speaking to and in front of customers, learning from them. There's not enough proper alignment between marketing, sales, customer success, account growth teams, operations teams. And I think all of those people need to be accountable to the customer. There needs to be a regular cadence of engagement with the customer. But too few salespeople are willing to make that part of the contract. And if you are not constantly listening to the raw, unfiltered conversation with the customer, then all you're getting is just snippets, or you're making massive erroneous assumptions. So let's finish on that. In terms of how you would advise people to make sure that there is that communication, alignment, and accountability, what would you suggest the executive team does to make sure that is happening?
Well, I think that's an interesting and a challenging question, because what you want to know is the sale that didn't happen. You know, everybody rings the bell, puts it up on the board, and it's like, we made it, right? So what about the counterfactual side of what could you have done differently to have made the sale? And I don't know if egos or courage or interest are the lacking component of finding out why you did not make the sale. Where we celebrate the sale, and absolutely we should, but like a placement, the least important person in a sale are the people that you didn't sell to. And I remind my headhunters of that all the time. You called 325 people on that VP of marketing search, and you're celebrating Susie Smith getting it, but what about the other 324 that didn't get it? Those are your future customers. And so I think it would be really important to understand of doing a post-mortem, certainly on what did you do in the sale and what could have gotten better about it, or what can we do to get the next sale out of that relationship. That's really interesting. What's more interesting to examine is, why don't you sample 7 people who didn't show up? And I'm about to go through that in one of my organizations right now. Is I want to call, and you've always got to do it well after the sale, in my opinion, because if you do it immediately after the loss of the sale, it's not quite the same honesty. And I would say, based on your product or service, you've got to decide what that timeline is spend time, pick up the phone, and it can't be an intern or a clerk. It's got to be somebody very high up in the organization who calls up and asks Mrs. Susie Smith or Mr. Bob Smith, hey, listen, we tried, but we didn't. What can you do to help us understand how we might have changed that outcome? And that language is very important to use, not how we could have had you buy, how we could have potentially changed that outcome. And your head will spin on how much valuable information you learn in that exchange if you would have the discipline and ego to do that on a weekly or quarterly basis.
Well, it's really interesting. Salesforce's research on this is very, very clear. The companies that routinely speak to people who didn't buy and unhappy customers have a 600% faster product development cycle than companies that don't. So grow a pair and go and speak to those people. Matt Sweezy has come up with what I think is the most elegant customer satisfaction survey. And I recommend that every single salesperson adopts something similar at the end of every sales conversation. Matt's survey questions are: what got you to this moment? Did this experience meet your expectation? And this is the clincher: have you seen better? Now, every single salesperson, when you finish a conversation with a prospect or a customer, ask them the question, how did I do on this call? I'm interested in the warts and all. Don't spare my feelings. Just tell me the truth. Did the experience meet your expectation? Have you seen better, and where? What did they do that was better? The other thing I would urge every single sales team to do is a pre-mortem. So it's imagine it's the day after the announcement of whoever won this particular piece of business. Why did we not win it? And what I've been doing with my clients over the years is having these pre-mortems, and you have a red team and a white team. The white team defends the opportunity and the red team tears it to pieces. And inevitably, they think through stuff that might happen. They've got that contingency built in. So when it does happen, they're fully prepared. And I cannot stress enough, you need to do your research, you need to do your rehearsal, and you need to try and break the process so that you can work out where you will potentially go wrong, so that when you show up, you are in peak performance. Okay. Joe, thank you so much. This has been an absolute belter of a conversation as ever. Can't wait for the next one, he said, hopefully. If you had one bit of advice to give to your 23-year-old self, what would it have been?
Oh, gosh, I would say it's probably always drive for a higher level of self-awareness. Understand what you do, how it potentially impacts others. Not necessarily change it, but understand. And then always be able to try to argue the other person's point and position. I think at 23, I might have moved along with less collateral damage in my life on the people I came in contact with.
That's really good advice. Excellent. Joe, how can people get hold of you?
You can reach me at joe@mullingsgroup.com. You can also find me at LinkedIn at Joe Mullings, and also at joemullings.com, my webpage.
Fantastic. Joe Mullings, thank you.
Thank you, my friend. Be well.
Excellent. So if you are the owner or founder or CEO of a tech company in the $10 to $50 million mark, you're looking to grow your business and achieve real sustainable hypergrowth with highly engaged and highly productive employees in sales, marketing, customer success, and account growth that's fully aligned. And you want to get customers who stay with you for 5, 10, 15, 20 years, then let's have a conversation. And if you are interested in elevating the sales profession, we've just launched a global community called Sales: A Force for Good. And its mission is to remind us that we exist because of, not in spite of, the customer. And it's to raise the selling profession and ultimately to make it an aspirational career choice and make it a better place for the next generation of salespeople. You can reach me at marcus@laughs-last.com or DM me on LinkedIn. And if you've enjoyed this conversation with myself and Joe, then please like, comment, share, and subscribe. And if you feel the urge, scroll down just below the fold on Apple Podcasts and give the podcast an honest review. 1 star or 5 star, not fussed which, just give it an honest review. In the meantime, stay safe and happy selling. Bye-bye.